The Aaron Hernandez murder trial lasted nearly 100 days, from jury selection to Wednesday's guilty verdict and sentencing. The jury chosen to decide the case, men and women from all across southeastern Massachusetts. And after months of testimony and a week of deliberations, their job is over. And those jurors came to just one local station to tell their story. This one, the Hernandez jury, behind the verdict, an NBC 10 News exclusive. Here's Adam Bagney.
The murder of Odin Lloyd was a brutal crime. A man driven to a secluded area and shot at least 5 times, left to die in darkness. The man convicted of the crime was an NFL star, a member of this community, admired by both children and adults alike. After a lengthy selection process and a trial that lasted months, 15 jurors, including 3 alternates, decided the fate of Aaron Hernandez. So how did they get there? What was going through their mind, and why was the defendant guilty? Those just some of the questions answered today when NBC 10 spoke exclusively to all the jurors but one. We began our conversation with a simple question: why even talk to us in the first place? All right, so I guess my first question is, why? Why are you guys all here today, and why are you speaking out?
Because you asked us to.
We see these juries in a lot of big cases, and they go their separate ways. You guys are all here together the day after the verdict. Why get together and sort of explain what happened? Why was it important to you guys?
We made the decision as a group, and we're staying as a group.
We're united from day one. We've been with each other for so long that we are comfortable with being with one another and trusting of one another. And for me, that's why we chose to do this as a group.
How crazy have the last 24 hours been?
Very crazy.
Roller coaster. You know, I think I've said this before. You know, people congratulated us when it was over, but I've said, who really won? Odin Lloyd's mother didn't win because her son isn't here anymore. She may have got justice, but she didn't win. Aaron Hernandez didn't win. He's going to be in jail for the rest of his life. And then there's a little girl who's going to never know her father. So nobody won.
Now that you've been able to sleep on it here for a day, any feelings changed? Do you feel more comfortable even than you did 24 hours ago?
I think we felt comfortable with our decision when we made it, because it wasn't based on anything other than the facts and the evidence. And when you allow the facts and the evidence to dictate your decisions, you know, you can rest easy with your decisions, knowing that you came to them the right way.
You guys seem so confident. That's one thing that really stuck out to me during your brief press conference yesterday. You were very confident in your decision. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes. Yes. We made sure we took our time and we analyzed everything before we made our final decision. I mean, it was, I think, 7 days, you know, or parts of 7 days. It was, we didn't just rush into anything.
When did you realize this is not a typical trial?
When he walked in. When he walked in.
The very first day, I think, you know, at least for my group, there were like 150 some odd people, and I had never served or got called in before, and I'm just looking around the room, and I asked the woman next to me, is this normal? And she's like, I don't think so. You know, and then when everyone came in, we kind of realized what it was. Yeah, there was over 1,100 people that came through those doors, and you guys ended up being the people that sat on the jury. How many people knew Aaron Hernandez, just by a show of hands?
Of him.
Well,
of
him.
I knew of him.
Everyone knew at least of him. How many Patriots fans? And did that worry you at all? And that had to be a question that the judge asked you guys when you went in.
It was on that questionnaire. Yep, they asked how many games we've been to, what was our level of knowledge of the Patriots team, and we were all honest with her, and they decided to pick us.
I think there's so many people out there that think there is no way you guys could have avoided all this media coverage. There's no way you didn't tell your family and friends about this case, and there's no way you guys didn't know something. This was a major national story. Why are they all wrong?
For me, anyway, I wouldn't have been able to I wouldn't have been okay with my decision had it come from anything other than what they wanted us to evaluate the case on, was the facts and the evidence, and I just don't see how you could come to any type of conclusion any other way else.
How are you able to not tell your family? How do you go about that?
Difficult.
It was difficult. Very hard.
You just say I'm at jury duty and that's the end of it?
Yeah.
A lot of my family didn't even know I was in jury duty.
Is that right?
I had phone calls yesterday saying, oh, now I know where you are.
How about the pieces of information that you guys did know going into the trial? I'm sure there's some of you that at least perhaps had heard something.
The one picture that I have in my mind was when that was all over the news, when he was taken out of his home with a shirt over his body and red shorts, and I told the judge that.
It took 7 days, took 36 hours. You guys did have a lot of evidence to go through, and maybe that's your answer. What took so long? Why not shorter? Why not longer?
Over 400 pieces of evidence and over 130 witness testimonies to go through. It takes a very long time.
Just because somebody says something in court doesn't mean that that's physical evidence, that that's proof that that happened. We had to go through and discuss every piece of testimony, look over every piece of evidence, and make sure that we weren't falsely interpreting something and jumping to an irrational decision, that we were absorbing it collectively as a group and making sure that unanimously we were making the right decisions.
One of the issues, some of the big issues with the state's case, or at least a lot of outsiders thought these were issues, was the fact that it was all circumstantial evidence. No gun, no clothes that Hernandez was wearing that night, no eyewitnesses. Why, at the end of the day, was that not an issue for you guys?
Because there were 430 some odd other pieces of evidence that allowed us to get to that same conclusion.
Exactly.
The enormity of the circumstantial evidence?
Yes, absolutely.
Again, that answers part of your question as to the length of it, where you take into totality the amount of evidence that you're looking at, and it's consuming. It takes time.
Together.
What about the lack of motive? How did that affect you guys? We really didn't hear about the motive until potentially the closing arguments there at the end.
You wish it was more clear, but we didn't need to have a motive where you could interpret motives any way that you wanted. There were a number that were given as possibilities. So
I'm going to shoot off a couple pieces of evidence for you guys. Maybe you can just give me some feedback on what you thought about them. First, the surveillance footage at Aaron's house was pretty extensive. Were you convinced that that was a gun that he had in the various sequences that we saw, at least one of them?
Yes.
Yes.
And what did it for you?
well, I don't think we thought it was a remote control clicker. We'll go there.
Or an iPad.
Yeah.
There were iPads and there were remote control clickers, but at certain points, you know.
Yeah.
I know you guys didn't know about this at the time, but it was very controversial when the judge met with the victim's mother before she took the stand. I think just a couple days into the trial, she told Ursula Ward, she instructed her to try not to cry on the stand. Was it tough not to be emotional?
Yes.
It was.
Yeah.
Especially in the beginning when you're seeing all of these photographs, you know, and
hearing
at
the
scene
families'
and the family, that's hard.
In your mind too, and you're also trying to keep in your mind too that you have to be fair to both sides.
Yeah.
Where you want to be fair
Yeah.
to the victim and you want to be fair to the defendant and what's been accused.
What do you think was more pressure on you? Was it the fact that you had a man's life in your hands, or the fact that you were charged with bringing justice to the family of this victim? Can you say one way or the other?
I think they're both equal.
Both. It was both.
There was a lot of weight, there was a lot of burden on all of us, and I think equally for both of those reasons.
Yeah.
Does it affect you, and I think you already answered this question, but maybe you can expand on it, the fact that Ursula was there, the family was there the entire time, does that affect the deliberations at all, or does it just keep in your mind that it's real? How did that affect you guys, I guess is my question.
You want to make sure that you get a family answers, but you want to make sure that the answers that you give them are the actual factual answers. You know, where that's what was so important about this case, is that you have to get it right, where you're looking at an entire situation and you're evaluating it, and you want to make sure that when you tell people that you have evaluated everything, that you did it correctly. So.
What parts of the trial did make you guys most emotional? You mentioned the photos.
Yeah, in the beginning, when you first see the photos, you know, of Odin Lloyd's body, and then especially, you know, hearing the family's reaction, me sitting right there, I could hear their sobs, and you're sitting there seeing somebody dead on a screen and you're listening to the family grieve. It pulls at your heart, you know, and you have to hold back those tears. You can't show that. That's one of your instructions as a juror, not to show emotion, and that was hard.
Could you see her run from the courtroom?
Yes.
Several times. This trial took an emotional toll on so many, including the jurors. I know because I witnessed it firsthand. But yesterday, many of the jurors were criticized, not as much for their verdict, but rather for their reactions in a post-trial press conference. They'll explain right after this.
Closed captioning on NBC 10 is brought to you by Cardi's Furniture. Nairobi offers same-day mattress delivery 7 days a week.
The Aaron Hernandez murder trial tested the emotional limits of two families for more than 2 months. So some were surprised yesterday when jurors were seen smiling, joking, and laughing with the media. Today, I asked the group about that, and their response was simple. Don't be so quick to judge. I know you wanted to address this from yesterday. Some people criticized you and said, you know what, the jurors, here they are laughing in a press conference hours or minutes after they gave the verdict. Can you explain to people why that was?
Well, especially me, and these jurors have been around me since January. They know that I always have a smile on my face. Like, I'd be walking out of the car, going to the bus, they're like, you're always smiling. And I'm like, that's just me. And then on the way down from the elevator, like after, you know, giving the verdict and everyone being in the juror room together, kind of decompressing, and then going in the elevator down to the press conference, we were cracking jokes in the elevator just to kind of cut the tension and loosen us up a little bit. And then when we walked in, the press was all there. You guys seen how tense we were and uptight. You guys kind of made some jokes to us too to kind of loosen us up. So I just stayed with my grin, and that's just me. I don't even realize I have it. And, you know, and so with her reading her opening statement, I saw myself beside her with a smile on my face. Wasn't that I was laughing or taking that, you know, not serious. It's serious, but that's just how I am. And I know that some people put it out there on social media that knew me, and they were like, no, we know her, she's a friend of ours, that's just her personality, it's her.
And you can't keep a straight face for 3 months, and let's face it, there were light moments in that court.
There were, and
I believe it, though, there's not one person on this jury that thought that a man losing his life was funny.
I'm sorry to see somebody go to jail for the rest of their life. No one I hear or anyone should be happy to see someone go to jail. But, you know, just the relief that the right decision was made.
The mountain of evidence in this case was just that, from a shell casing to a footprint to a piece of gum. And the amount of witnesses was just as daunting, 135 in total. And one of them, one of the most recognizable faces in sports, the jurors on Patriots owner Robert Kraft, when we come back. The jurors in the Aaron Hernandez murder trial heard hundreds of hours of testimony from more than 100 witnesses, from the high schooler who discovered the body to the medical examiner who conducted its autopsy. But perhaps the most compelling came from both the defendant's fiancé and his former boss. Another recurring theme from the defense was that Aaron was targeted. They went after him. They were looking to get him because he was a celebrity. Why did you guys reject that?
Everyone should be treated equally in the eyes of the law.
Yeah. Right.
There's no other way to be fair to someone than to put everyone on that even plane and let the evidence dictate where you go from there.
And the evidence showed that he made choices, and he could have made different ones.
What was the best point that the defense did make, though, that made you think? How about that closing argument? He really appealed to you as Americans. He said, you might as well throw the Constitution out the window, right? Did that appeal to you at all?
No.
Why?
We were there for one purpose, to go through the evidence, listen to the witnesses, and make a decision based on the law.
Speaking of that closing argument, Mr. Sultan admitted that Aaron was at the crime scene. You guys were stunned, right?
Just to clarify, we were surprised he said it.
Right.
Going through the evidence, it led to that same conclusion. That wasn't a aha moment for us. We were just, I think, more surprised that he would say something like that in the closing, especially where in the opening it contradicted that.
All right, I want to ask you about some specific witnesses that we had during this trial. Let's start with Shayana Jenkins. Was she believable?
point, maybe.
Right.
So she could actually remember something.
Yeah.
She didn't remember where she took the bag and where the dumpster was. Was that a big red flag for you guys?
Yes.
And why?
And there are pictures of her getting money out of the ATM in Franklin, and she's right on the camera. So it's like, this is where you were, and she said she didn't remember where she was.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about another witness, Shania. What did you make of the dynamic that she was on the opposite side during this trial of her sister the whole time?
It spoke volumes.
It was sad.
It spoke volumes.
Very sad for her.
Yeah. Then just to hear her sister kind of explain their estranged relationship after, it was sad.
Robert Kraft. How many people knew who he was?
I know.
So, when he came in, was there a different electricity, or was it just like another witness for you guys?
Just another witness.
Especially for me, I didn't even know him.
Right.
After he walked out, Sean was the one that was sitting next to me. I couldn't help but say to Sean, hey, who is this guy? And so he looked at me like, really? And I went, yeah.
But he wasn't there just for show. He had something
no.
significant to say.
Yeah.
He had a one-on-one conversation with the defendant 2 days after the murder, and that was really one of the only times we heard about the alibi. How did that affect, and John, you talked about it yesterday, how did that affect your decision-making?
I almost immediately realized that, throughout this process, they still haven't determined the exact time of the murder or the death. So for Aaron to tell Robert Kraft that he wished that information became public because he was at a club at that time, I immediately put the two and two together. How could he have had that knowledge, especially if he wasn't involved or if he wasn't present? How could you possibly know that?
Odin Lloyd's mother, were you guys able to see the impact statements that were made?
I have.
Some of you have, some of you haven't. Odin Lloyd's mother, Ursula, gave really an amazing impact statement, and she said that she forgives the individuals that were responsible for her son's murder. How was she able to do it?
She's a strong
woman.
Very strong.
Yeah.
She's a better person than me.
Coming up, it was a moment that would change the lives of two families forever, for better or worse. What the jurors wanted to tell the mother of the victim and the verdict next.
Storm Team 10 reports are brought to you by Tarbox Toyota Hyundai, where you're in the driver's seat.
Welcome back. Every second of the Aaron Hernandez murder trial was recorded, watched online and on television by millions. Their focus on the day of the verdict was one woman forced into the spotlight as the jury's foreman. I want to ask you about the verdict and your foreman here. What was it like to read that verdict?
Life-changing for me. It's the nervousness, the thought that this is my responsibility to actually have to say that to him. It was amazing. It will not be something that I forget for a long time. This morning when I was getting dressed was the first time that I heard it on the TV, which was in a different room, and it was my voice, and it was just, again, it was overwhelming that, wow, I had to do that. I had to say that he was guilty. And to have everybody around me so that I didn't have to do that by myself was absolutely fantastic. But it is very overwhelming.
When you were named the foreman, were you thinking, oh, great?
Yes. Just broke out into an immediate sweat and was like, oh, no.
We were getting ready to catch her, I think.
Yeah.
All right, your adrenaline has to be pumping, though, right?
It was. Like, the judge was still talking, and I could see her, but I couldn't hear her for a few minutes because I was just trying to internalize what had just happened and that, take a deep breath, relax, you can do this.
But some of you definitely looked at Ursula Ward.
Yeah.
The way you looked at her was almost as if you said, we got you.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes. You wanted to hug her and tell her it's going to be okay because we're going to give you some good news in a minute. You wanted to let her know it's going to be okay. But how is it okay? She's not going to get her son back, but you wanted to let her know there's going to be justice, this peace. You're going to have peace after this, and so will we.
we saw firsthand the result of the decision that we made and the emotion that it caused, you know, with all of the people that were involved, you know, and I think that's where we, you know, our hearts were going out to everyone in the room.
There was a piece of video after the verdict came down. It appeared to show Aaron shaking his head, and he seemed to be mouthing, "You're wrong," as he sort of looked in your direction. Any response or thoughts on that?
I had mentioned something earlier that if he wanted to testify, if he wanted to get his story or his point across, maybe that's something that should have been incorporated throughout the trial.
And now a final thought. It should be noted that this jury didn't seek the publicity they received today. They weren't paid and nothing was promised. They merely wanted to inform you, the public. After all, they're members of this community. Of course, NBC 10 has brought you in-depth coverage of this proceeding every step of the way. Join us right here again tomorrow night for a half-hour special dedicated to the Aaron Hernandez murder trial. Aaron Hernandez, The Fall of a Football Star, airs Friday night at 7 p.m. On behalf of everyone at NBC 10, thank you to the jurors for your time and to everyone who assisted us in our coverage of this important case, especially the family of the victim. And thank you for watching. I'm Adam Bagney. Good night.